She was only 13 years old. Too young for battle, too young for politics, too young, it seemed, to stand against an empire. Yet when Rome tried to crush her faith, Eulalia of Emerita chose defiance over silence, courage over fear. What followed was not just the death of a child, but the birth of a legend that even the fires of persecution could not destroy. In the early 4th century, the Roman Empire was entering one of its hardest periods. Enemies pressed its borders, soldiers demanded higher pay, and provinces were restless under heavy taxes. Inside the empire, old traditions were weakening while new faiths and philosophies spread among the people. The unity that once made Rome strong was breaking apart. At the center of power, Emperor Diocletian believed that the troubles of the empire were caused not only by politics and war but also by religion. He saw Christianity, with its refusal to honor the Roman gods, as a direct threat to the empire's stability. To Diocletian, the refusal of Christians to sacrifice at temples was rebellion against Rome itself. His solution was to try to root out the new faith through strict laws and punishment. But the empire's attempt to silence Christians would soon focus on one of its youngest and boldest opponents. In February of the year 303 CE, Emperor Diocletian issued the first of several harsh laws against Christians. These orders demanded that churches be destroyed, holy books be burned, and gatherings for worship be banned. Every citizen was required to sacrifice to the Roman gods as a public sign of loyalty. Those who refused would face loss of property, imprisonment, or worse. Local governors were given the duty to enforce these laws without exception, and many carried them out with cruelty. Across the empire, fear spread among Christians who now had to choose between faith and safety. When this law reached the thriving city of Emerita Augusta, it would ignite a confrontation no one expected, from a child. Emerita Augusta, the capital of the Roman province of Lusitania, was one of the richest cities in the Western Empire. Its wide streets, grand temples, and busy amphitheater showed the strength of Roman culture in Spain. Merchants, soldiers, and officials filled its markets, making it a place of wealth and influence. Yet behind this display of Roman power, new ideas were taking root. Christianity, though illegal, had begun to spread quietly from household to household. Small groups of believers gathered in private homes to pray and share their faith, often at great risk. They kept their meetings hidden, knowing discovery could mean punishment. Among these secret believers was a family whose daughter was about to defy the empire itself. Eulalia was born around the year 290 CE into a wealthy and respected family in Lusitania. While her surroundings were filled with Roman traditions, her household quietly followed the Christian faith. From a young age, she showed a strong devotion and spoke openly about her beliefs, even when it was unsafe to do so. Unlike many children, she did not fear the warnings of punishment or the power of Roman officials. Her parents, however, were deeply worried. They tried to shield her from danger, hoping that time and caution would soften her zeal. They kept her away from the city and from public gatherings, thinking she was too young to face the risks of persecution. Yet Eulalia's faith only grew stronger, and her refusal to honor the Roman gods became even more outspoken. Her parents thought they could protect her by hiding her away, but she had other plans. When Eulalia reached the age of 13, her determination could no longer be contained. One night, while her parents slept, she slipped away from the countryside villa where they had kept her hidden. A young companion went with her, but the choice to leave was her own. Under the cover of darkness, she walked the road toward Emerita, the very heart of Roman authority in the province. Her goal was not escape but confrontation. She wanted to stand before the governor and declare her faith without fear. At dawn, she stood before the governor's tribunal, ready to challenge Rome with words no child had ever dared to speak. Before the tribunal, Eulalia spoke with a boldness that silenced the crowd. She declared that the Roman gods were nothing but demons and that the emperor's cult was false. The governor, Decianus, was astonished to hear such fierce words from a child. First, he tried persuasion rather than force. He promised her wealth, a fine marriage, and forgiveness if she would only offer sacrifice to the gods. He urged her to think of her youth and her future. But Eulalia refused every offer without hesitation. To show her contempt, she struck the altar before her, scattering the offerings prepared for sacrifice. The people gasped, shocked that a girl so young would defy Rome so openly. Now, the governor had only one option left: punishment that even grown men rarely survived. Eulalia was taken from the forum and locked in a prison cell, but her spirit did not weaken. Through the night, the guards heard her praying and singing hymns, her voice steady in the darkness. Some were unsettled, whispering that such courage in a child was unnatural. By morning, word of her defiance had spread through Emerita, and a curious crowd gathered outside, eager to see what punishment the governor would choose. Many expected her to beg for mercy, yet she showed no sign of fear. The stage was set for a spectacle of torture that would horrify even hardened Romans. The governor ordered that Eulalia be put through a series of punishments meant to break her spirit. She was first stripped and flogged, her young body torn by the lashes. When she refused to cry out, iron hooks were raked across her skin. Burning torches were pressed against her sides, leaving deep wounds, and molten lead was poured near her feet to frighten her into surrender. Still she would not bow. Boiling oil was brought forward, scalding her flesh, and other torments followed one after another until they numbered 13 in all, one for each year of her life. The crowd, which had gathered in curiosity, grew restless as the cruelty continued. Some turned away in silence, while others wept at the sight of a child enduring such pain. The officials expected her to yield, but her lips still moved in prayer, and her eyes showed no surrender. Yet even as her body was destroyed, Eulalia's defiance only grew stronger. At last, the governor gave the final order. Eulalia was to be burned alive. A wooden stake was set up, and she was bound to it as the crowd looked on in silence. Flames rose quickly, wrapping her fragile body in smoke and fire. According to Christian tradition, as her last breath left her, a white dove was seen flying from her mouth, a sign of her soul's release. At the same moment, snow began to fall, covering the city and softening the scene of cruelty. To her persecutors, this was the end of her defiance, a warning to others who might resist Rome. Her death was meant to erase her memory, but instead it created something unstoppable. After the flames died down, the Christians of Emerita quietly recovered Eulalia's body, risking their own lives to honor her sacrifice. They buried her with care, and her grave soon became a place of prayer and pilgrimage. Stories of her courage spread quickly beyond Lusitania, reaching other Christian communities across Hispania. In time, devotion to her name grew into a widespread cult, with hymns and poems celebrating her as a holy martyr. Churches and shrines were dedicated to her, ensuring that her memory would never fade. What began as the tragic death of a child became a symbol of faith that no empire could suppress. Within a decade, the empire that killed her would begin its transformation into a Christian state. In the years that followed, the Roman Empire itself began to change. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, granting freedom to Christians and ending the great persecutions. By 380 CE, Christianity had become the empire's official religion. Within this new world, Eulalia's story shone brightly as an example of courage and faith. Great basilicas were built in her honor, her feast day was celebrated, and hymns were written to keep her memory alive. Through the Middle Ages and into the early modern era, her example inspired believers to endure hardship and resist oppression. She was remembered not only as a martyr but as a child whose voice defied the mightiest empire of her time. But her legacy raises questions that echo even today. Today, the story of Eulalia continues to hold meaning far beyond its ancient setting. At its heart, it reminds us that even a child can show extraordinary agency, speaking truth to power when others remain silent. Her defiance highlights timeless struggles for religious freedom and human rights, themes that still shape debates across the world. Some historians question how much of her story is literal history and how much is legend shaped by Christian memory. Yet even if parts were later shaped into myth, the core truth remains powerful. a young girl stood against injustice and would not yield. That image has echoed through centuries as both inspiration and challenge. Eulalia's short life forces us to ask, is there anything worth more than survival itself? And what do we do when even a child answers yes?